I think so far the Occupy movement has had some tremendous accomplishments. First of all, it's got people motivated, broken out of their apathy. It has inspired so many people who have never been activists before to come out and start taking action and to feel like they're part of a movement with a commitment to not just doing one action or one protest, but to really something that I think most people see as part of a whole process of culture shift and something much bigger than any single action. That is a huge achievement. Secondly, it's put issues of economic inequality right front and center on the public agenda. It's changed the language. I know in the States, at least, every politician now has adopted the language of the Occupy movement. They're all trying to position themselves as the 99%, you know, and that, again, I mean, in 10 years of the global justice movement, with all the mobilizations and actions we did, we were never able to achieve that kind of public shift. So that has been an enormous gain for the movement, and it's really put the bankers and the 1% on the defensive in a way that they weren't even 3-4 months ago. I think of the moment right now as kind of a phase shift. You know, the movement had that uprising. It's been, you know, tremendously successful, and, you know, it's been at the top of the news for weeks and weeks and weeks on end. And every time something awful happens to it, something else happens that puts it back in the top. You know, oftentimes something awful, but, you know, like the kids getting pepper sprayed at UC Davis or something, but it's really grabbed the public attention. But in the last few weeks, many of the occupations have been driven out of their physical locations. It's also getting to be winter, which makes it much harder to do public things outside in northern climates, though bless them, they're, you know, many of those people are still there. I give them so much credit, but so I think people all over are sort of saying, what's the next phase going to be? And how do we carry on this momentum without losing it, but maybe shift some of the forms that it takes or some of the focus that it takes? I think there's some major challenges within the movement. You know, one of the challenges has been, you know, that the Occupy movement plunked itself down the middle of the public, you know, square, right? Which is, again, part of its success, that it created a commons. It created something I think we've all been hungry for, which is a real sense of a public community engaged in these public questions about where we're going and what our politics should be and what our economy should be and who should be held accountable. That's another tremendous success. But in the process of doing that, it attracted to itself all kinds of people, including people, many people who are really damaged, you know, people who have been pushed out of the system and had no social power, people who have no houses to go back to, people who are struggling with mental illness or with unresolved trauma. You know, in the States, half of our homeless population are veterans. And that goes back to veterans of the Vietnam War who have dealing with unhealed traumas of 40 years ago. So in some ways, it's like the homeless and the people whose needs are huge and tremendous. The Occupy movement has really valiantly tried to meet as many of those needs as it can. And it has done stuff for people. I mean, I've heard many tales of police and social service agencies telling people, you know, oh, you've got no food, you've got no home, go down to the Occupy, they'll feed you, right? But it's hard to be both a social movement and an unfunded social service agency. And that's been a big challenge and a big tension. It's also, there have been a lot of people in and around the camps who are just not in a state where maybe they're really capable of understanding other people's needs and positions and taking them into account. And so it's been hard to struggle around issues of how are we open to everybody and still set boundaries and still make places that are really safe for people and still hold people accountable for their behavior. That's been a big challenge. Another big challenge, I think, is going to be the 99% is big and broad. It's not the 99% who share my particular political analysis, right? So how do we take such a big, broad movement, continue to build it and broaden it, and still give it a political focus and the sharpness that comes from a real analysis of where these power differentials come from in society and what we need to do to actually address them. And then the third thing, I think, is those questions of how we struggle, how we fight, what tactics are okay, whether or not okay. Are we going to have action agreements? Is nonviolence the framework for the movement? Does property destruction fit in with that? If so, under what circumstances? If not, how do we actually make agreements to make sure that our actions take place in the way that we want them to take place? All of those are, again, big challenges that we face. And finally, the challenge of what comes next. Where do we go? What do we do? Right? How do we carry this on? In my heart of hearts, I'd love to see encampments that are models of permaculture and alternative energy and that are beautiful, and where we're growing food in the middle of the city streets and really transforming things in a positive way. I'd love to see people being able to take over foreclosed homes and give them back to people. I'd love to see people doing really effective, strategic, nonviolent direct actions around some of the corporations that should be held accountable for these things. And I'd love to see people come up with things that I can't even imagine, which I know they will. I think this movement is really powerfully about love. That's what I feel when I hear people talk about what inspires them. It's why people have been sleeping out on the streets. It's why people have been coming together both out of this sense of love for this community we're just beginning to imagine that prefigures how the world could be, and love for these things that we care about, for our homes, for our families, for the trees, for the plants, for the planet, that we're defending against, the greedy idiots who are destroying it. When we're acting out of love, we're acting out of a strength that I think really can't be defeated. So to me, that's one of the really powerful cores of the movement, that it is so much about love. I would say that don't look to the movement to come out with the rational 10-point demands thought out on this policy or that. That's not really what it's about. In essence, it's really a moral outrage. It says it is absolutely so outrageous what's going on. The theft of wealth from the poor, the siphoning of it all off to the rich, the injustice, the violence that we see is there to support that theft. It's so outrageous that we just can't go on with our lives as usual. We're going to sit out in the public square and squat and protest and march and do whatever we have to do until we shift it and change it, because it's fundamentally wrong for so many people to be in such deep want and other people simply to be profiting off their misery. A lot of people have been outraged and not knowing what to do about it. A lot of people have been angry and swearing at the TV and grumbling, over the breakfast table and just not knowing what to do about it. And I think what the Occupy movement says is, you know what? Here's what you can do about it. Come on down, right? Connect up with other people, get together, meet with people, meet in your neighborhood. If you don't want to sleep out in the streets, let's have general assemblies in our homes, you know, and in our neighborhoods, and talk about the real issues and take democracy back into our hands. It's not just about having elections and running candidates and spending billions of dollars on campaigns. It's really about people getting together and making decisions about the things that affect their lives. And no one can stop us from doing that. There are a million different ways to do that. If we start doing that, then we take back our fate and the fate of our country and the fate of our world into our own hands, and we have the power to shift it and change it.